He found her freezing beneath a train station bench, and before the next spring thaw, their names would be spoken in rooms where men with clean hands signed away stolen land. Blackwater Station sat on the edge of nowhere in the winter of 1873, a low wooden depot pressed between the rail line and a white field of sleeping prairie. The last passenger train had gone west an hour before, leaving behind the smell of coal smoke, wet wool, and bitter coffee burned black in a tin pot near the stove. Wind slipped through the gaps in the walls and made the lantern flames shiver. Men kept their collars high and their eyes low. Nobody wanted trouble at that hour. Caleb Whitmore only meant to pass through. He had come in from the cattle trail with frost on his hat brim, a bedroll over one shoulder, and a ticket folded inside his glove for a freight car headed south by morning. He was 36 years old, though the weather had carved him older, with a face made quiet by too many things left unsaid. He had learned long ago that a man could survive the West by minding his own business. Then he heard the sound beneath the bench. Not a cry, not even a word, just a breath catching where breath should not have been. Caleb stopped near the station stove. Across the room, two drummers warmed their hands and pretended not to notice. The ticket clerk leaned over his ledger. A woman in a gray bonnet pulled her boy closer and turned his face away. Caleb followed their silence to the far wall, where the shadows gathered under a bench made slick by melted snow. At first, he saw only a blanket stiff with ice. Then a hand. Brown fingers curled tight around a silver coin with a hole drilled clean through its center. The woman beneath the bench was Apache. Her black hair was frozen at the ends. Snow clung to the folds of her dress and the fringe of her shawl. Her lips had gone pale from the cold, and her eyes, half open, watched the room the way a wounded deer watches wolves from the brush. She was not begging. That struck Caleb first. A person near death would often reach for anything. She reached for nothing. She only held that coin against her chest like it was the last warm thing left in the world. The clerk spoke without looking up. "Best leave her be, mister." Caleb did not answer. He took one step closer. The floorboards complained under his boots. The woman's eyes sharpened, dark and terrified, but her body was too weak to move away. The clerk dipped his pen again. "Marshal Vale's been asking after an Apache woman. Said whoever helps her will answer for it." The stove popped. Outside, the wind dragged loose snow across the platform. Caleb looked at the woman, then at the men who had already chosen not to see her. He had worn that kind of silence once. It had fit him badly ever since. He knelt slowly, keeping his hands where she could see them, and eased his coat from his shoulders. "Ma'am," he said, voice low as a church bell in fog. "I ain't the marshal." She tried to speak. Only a whisper came out. "Don't let them send me back." Caleb froze. Not from the cold, from the fear inside those words. Behind him, the depot door opened, and a new gust of air swept in, carrying snow, cigar smoke, and the hard rhythm of spurs. Every man in the room looked down. Caleb did not. He placed his coat over the Apache woman's trembling shoulders and turned toward the door, where Marshal Gideon Vale stood smiling like he had just found what belonged to him. Marshal Gideon Vale did not enter the depot like a man in a hurry. He came in slow, brushing snow from the shoulders of his long black coat, letting everyone have time to remember his name before he spoke. His hat brim was silvered with frost. His gloves were clean, too clean for a man who claimed to ride hard for the law. Behind him stood two railroad guards with brass buttons and tired eyes, men paid to look stern even when they did not understand the errand. Caleb stayed on one knee beside the woman, his coat already settling around her like a small piece of shelter in a room that had forgotten mercy. The Apache woman gripped the silver coin tighter. Caleb noticed the marks on her wrists then, not fresh enough to bleed, not old enough to fade. Thin shadows where rope or rough cord had been tied too long. Vale saw Caleb see them. His smile did not move. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, as if greeting an old friend at church. "I was told you were catching the southbound freight." Caleb rose slowly. He was not a tall man in a showy way, but there was weight in how he stood, like a fence post set deep against weather. That was the plan. "Plans change," Vale said. His eyes drifted past him to the woman under the bench. "Step aside." The ticket clerk shut his ledger with a soft clap. Nobody breathed loud. Even the stove seemed to quiet itself. Caleb looked at the guards, then back at Vale. "She is half frozen. She is wanted." "For what?" Vale pulled off one glove finger by finger. theft of railroad property, interference with military correspondence, traveling under false claim. The words sounded polished, worn smooth from use. Caleb had heard men like him speak before. They built cages out of proper sentences. The woman tried to sit up, but the effort took what little strength she had left. Caleb reached back, not touching her, only holding a hand in the air to tell her she did not have to rise. That small restraint made her look at him differently, not with trust, but with the first crack in fear. "You have papers?" Caleb asked. Vale laughed once, softly. "You asking to read the law now?" "I am asking if you brought any." A drummer near the stove shifted his boots. The woman in the gray bonnet lowered her gaze. Vale's smile thinned. "Careful, Cowboy. A man can make himself part of a problem by standing too close to it." Caleb could feel the cold through his shirt now. Giving away his coat had left him in a faded wool vest, and the depot draft cut straight through the seams. Still, he did not move. A woman freezing on a station floor is already a problem. Vale stepped closer, close enough that Caleb smelled cigar smoke and wintergreen on his breath. "That woman belongs to my custody." Caleb answered before the room could swallow him. "No woman belongs to a badge." The sentence landed quietly. That made it worse. A loud man could be dismissed. A quiet one had to be answered. Vale's eyes hardened. He glanced toward the clerk. "Open the freight office." The clerk fumbled with his keys. Caleb turned just enough to see the side door behind the ticket counter, the one leading to the baggage room, and the rear platform beyond it. He had loaded cattle through that platform years ago. He knew there was a coal bin outside, and beyond that, a line of empty stock cars waiting for the morning run. The Apache woman followed his eyes. Smart, Caleb thought. Weak as candle smoke, but smart. Vale held out his hand. The coin first. At that, her whole body went still. Not from cold this time. From warning. Caleb looked down at the silver coin with the clean hole through its center. It was not railroad property. It was not money either. A thing like that was made to carry something, or hide something, or remind somebody of a promise. The clerk got the freight door open. Snow blew across the floor in a thin white ribbon. Caleb bent as if to help the woman stand, keeping his voice lower than the stove hiss. "When I lift you, do not fight me." Her eyes searched his face. "Why?" Caleb looked once at Vale, then back at her. "Because he is more afraid of that coin than he is of you." Then the station lantern flickered hard. The room fell half dark, and Caleb Whitmore made his choice. Caleb moved when the lantern flame bent low, not fast enough to look guilty, not slow enough to be stopped. He slipped one arm behind the Apache woman's shoulders and helped her rise from beneath the bench. She was lighter than he expected, but not fragile. Even half frozen, she held herself with a kind of pride the cold had not managed to take. Vale's hand shifted toward his coat pocket. The guard stepped forward. Caleb turned the movement into something ordinary, guiding her toward the freight office as if obeying the marshal's command. "Easy now," he said, but the words were for the room as much as for her. She can barely stand. The woman leaned against him for one breath, then found her own feet. That mattered. Caleb felt it. So did she. They passed the ticket counter, close enough for Caleb to see Thomas Bell, the telegraph boy, sitting stiff behind the wire desk with ink on his fingers and fear in his eyes. Thomas was 13, maybe 14, with a collar too large for his neck and a mouth that always struggled to get words past the gate. He looked at the woman, then at Vale, then down at the message pad half hidden under his elbow. Caleb noticed that too. Out in the baggage room, the air was colder. Wooden crates lined the walls. Mail sacks hung from iron hooks. The rear door stood open to the platform, where snow moved in silver sheets across the tracks. Caleb guided the woman toward a stack of flour barrels, shielding her from the depot room behind them. "Name," he whispered. She kept her eyes on the open door. "Ayanna Red Willow." The name came soft, but it carried roots. "Caleb Whitmore." "I know." That stopped him. The wind pushed snow against his boots. Behind them, Vale was speaking to the clerk, voice smooth and close. Caleb looked at her. "How?" Ayanna opened her palm. The silver coin lay there, dark with the warmth of her skin. Its drilled hole was not empty. Inside the rim, almost invisible unless the light touched it right, a thin line of paper had been rolled tight and sealed beneath a sliver of wax. "A man told me," she said, "before he died." Caleb's face hardened, not with anger, but with memory pressing up from a place he kept covered. What man? Railroad engineer. Edwin Price. He said if I reached Blackwater, I should find the cowboy who once guarded the East Survey Camp. The one who looked away and lived long enough to regret it. The words did not shout. They did not need to. Caleb felt them settle between his ribs. Years vanished. He saw canvas tents by a dry wash, Apache families ordered away from creek water, railroad men laughing over maps they had no right to draw. He had been younger then, paid less, hungry enough to take any work. He had told himself silence was not the same as harm. It had taken him years to learn how wrong a quiet man could be. Ayanna watched the truth pass across his face. You were there. Caleb swallowed. Yes. Then you know what they are doing. I know what men do when land becomes numbers. She looked down at the coin. This holds the true survey. The line they filed in court goes around our burial ground. The line they plan to build cuts straight through it. Edwin Price copied the proof. Marshal Vale wants it back before morning. From the depot room, Vale called out, pleasant as a hymn. Mr. Whitmore, bring her out. Caleb studied the coin, then Ayanna's trembling hand. She expected him to take it, maybe sell it, maybe trade it for his own safe passage. Instead, he closed her fingers gently over it and stepped back. He did not open it. He did not ask to hold it. For the first time since he found her under that bench, Ayanna looked less afraid of him than of the cold. Why? She whispered. Caleb glanced at the snow-covered stock cars beyond the platform. Because a man does not get clean by stealing the last truth somebody has left. Then Thomas Bell appeared in the freight office doorway, pale as flour dust, holding the message pad against his chest. His lips shook around the words, but he forced them out. Mr. Caleb, he said, the marshal sent a wire before sundown. It was not about theft. It was about a witness. Thomas Bell stood in the doorway like a boy who had wandered into a storm and only now understood the size of the sky. The message pad trembled against his chest. Caleb heard Vale moving in the depot behind him, boots crossing the planks with patient certainty, the kind of patience men used when they believed every door already belonged to them. Ayanna stepped closer to the flour barrels, her silver coin hidden again inside her fist. Snow pushed through the open rear door and dusted the floor white around her boots. Say it plain, Thomas, Caleb whispered. The boy tried. His mouth caught on the first sound. Shame flushed up his neck, and for a moment his eyes dropped the way they always did when grown men waited too hard. Caleb lowered his voice. Nobody here is rushing you. That was all. A small mercy. But small mercies had weight in cold rooms. Thomas breathed in through his nose and looked at Ayanna instead of Caleb. The wire said she was not to reach Fort Mercy alive with testimony. The words came broken, but they came. Ayanna closed her eyes for 1 second, not from weakness, but because something she had feared had finally been given a shape. Caleb felt the last soft doubt leave the room. This was not a chase over stolen papers. It was a hunt for silence. Did you keep a copy? Caleb asked. Thomas nodded and pulled a folded yellow sheet from inside his vest. Station rules. Every outgoing wire gets pressed twice. Mr. Harlan told me never to waste paper, but I did it anyhow. He gave a nervous glance toward the main room. Marshal Vale saw me near the machine. He knows I know something. Ayanna studied the boy with the tired steadiness of someone who had learned to measure courage in unlikely places. You are afraid, she said. Thomas nodded. Yes, ma'am. Good, she said. Fear tells the truth before pride does. Caleb almost smiled, but the sound of Vale's voice cut it away. Last chance, Whitmore. The marshal was closer now. Do not make a public matter out of a private mistake. Caleb looked toward the rear platform. 50 yards beyond it sat a string of empty stock cars, their dark openings facing the storm. Past those cars, a coal shed leaned against the wind, and beyond that, open prairie rolled white and blind under moonlight. It was a hard path for a healthy man and a cruel one for a freezing woman, but staying was no path at all. He reached for the saddle blanket hanging over a crate and wrapped it around Ayanna's shoulders, careful not to crowd her. Can you walk 20 yards? He asked. She lifted her chin. I crossed 12 miles of snow before I fell under that bench. That was not an answer. It was enough of one. There it was, the spark under the ice. Caleb saw it and understood why Vale feared her. Not because she carried proof. Because she could carry pain without letting it make her small. Thomas stepped aside as Caleb eased open the rear door wider. The hinges groaned. Everyone froze. In the depot, the voices stopped. Caleb held his breath until the wind rose, covering the sound with a long, mournful whistle through the telegraph wires. Then they moved. Ayanna went first, one hand on the wall, the other locked around the coin. Caleb followed close enough to catch her if the cold took her knees, far enough to let her keep her dignity. Thomas came last, clutching the copied wire under his coat. They crossed the platform under a sky without stars. Snow stung Caleb's face. The rails shone faintly below, two black lines running into a country that had swallowed better men than him. Halfway to the stock cars, Ayanna stumbled. Caleb reached out. She caught herself before he touched her, then looked back at him, breathing hard. "You still think saving me will clean what you did?" she asked. Caleb shook his head. No. The answer surprised her more than any promise could have. Then why come? He looked toward the depot, where lantern light was beginning to spill through the freight door behind them. "Because this time, I know what silence costs." Ayanna stared at him through the snow, and something passed between them that was not forgiveness, not yet, but the first narrow bridge toward it. Then Thomas whispered from behind them, "They are coming." Caleb turned. Marshal Vale had stepped onto the platform, his black coat sharp against the yellow light, and in his hand was a lantern raised high enough to find their footprints. Vale's lantern swung in the storm, throwing long bars of gold across the platform and the snow-packed ties. Caleb saw the footprints at once, 3 sets cutting clean toward the stock cars. There was no hiding the trail, not in fresh snow, not from a man who had made a profession of following fear. Inside, Caleb whispered. He helped Thomas climb into the nearest stock car, then turned as Ayanna gripped the iron handle and pulled herself up without asking for his hand. Pride kept her upright where strength had begun to fail. Caleb followed and slid the door almost shut, leaving only a finger-wide seam through which the depot light trembled. The car smelled of old hay, cold iron, and animals long gone. Moonlight slipped through the cracks in the boards. Ayanna sank against the wall, breathing shallow. The saddle blanket around her shoulders had already collected a lace of frost. Thomas crouched near a feed trough, pressing the copied wire flat beneath his coat, as if his ribs could guard it better than locks. Outside, Vale's voice carried over the wind. "No need to run, Miss Red Willow. The prairie is colder than I am." Ayanna closed her eyes. Caleb could see the fever rising now, a flush beneath the chill, the dangerous kind that made a person burn while the world froze around them. He looked at the coin in her hand. That thing worth dying for. Her eyes opened. Some things are worth living for so hard they look the same. The answer settled in the dark. Caleb had no reply for it. He reached to his belt and unbuckled his holster. Thomas stared. "Mr. Caleb?" "There is a doctor's kit in the station office," Caleb said, "and laudanum behind the clerk's desk if Harlan has not drunk it." Ayanna stiffened. "You cannot go back." "I can if I give them something to look at." She understood before Thomas did. Her gaze dropped to the holster. "Your pistol. Only thing on me worth trading. A cowboy without a gun in this town is a man inviting wolves." Caleb gave a tired half-smile. "I have been mistaken for worse." He slid the holster beneath the stock car door and pushed it out into the snow. Then he stepped down after it, hands lifted, moving into Vale's lantern light before the marshal reached the car. The cold struck him hard through his vest. Vale stopped 10 yards away, his smile returning like a blade being sheathed. "That is sensible." Caleb kicked the holster across the snow. "Medicine first. For her. For a woman with fever." Vale tilted his head. "You have grown tender with age." Caleb did not answer. He had learned that some men used words like ropes, hoping others would struggle inside them. Vale gestured to one guard, who hurried back toward the depot. The other guard kept his eyes on Caleb, uncertain and cold. Minutes stretched thin. Inside the stock car, Ayanna watched through the crack, and for the first time, she saw what Caleb had given up. Not a weapon, not merely protection. In a place like Blackwater, he had laid down the symbol by which men measured him. The guard returned with a small leather medical pouch and a tin cup of steaming water. Caleb took them slowly, then backed toward the car. Vale led him. That was what troubled Caleb most. Vale was not finished. He was waiting for something larger than one frightened woman and one disgraced cowboy. Caleb climbed back inside and slid the door shut. His hands were shaking from cold as he opened the pouch. but he kept his voice steady. "Thomas, hold the cup." The boy obeyed. Ayanna tried to refuse the medicine until Caleb placed the spoon on the floor between them, not in her mouth, not in his hand, but where she could choose it. "Your life is yours," he said. Even now, she looked at the spoon, then at his empty belt. Slowly, she took the medicine herself. After a long silence, she spoke his name for the first time. "Caleb." It was only 2 syllables. But in that frozen car, with the storm pressing its face to the boards and the marshal waiting outside, it sounded like a door opening in a house long believed empty. Thomas looked toward the far end of the car. "Mr. Caleb," he whispered. "This car is coupled to the morning freight." Caleb followed his eyes to the iron latch, half buried in shadow. Then the whole line jolted beneath them, hard enough to rattle the boards. Somewhere ahead, an engine coughed awake. The engine's first cough rolled through the stock car like a warning from under the earth. Iron pulled against iron. Chains tightened. Somewhere ahead, men shouted through the storm, their voices muffled by steam and snow. Caleb braced one hand against the wall as the car lurched again, not moving yet, only waking. Ayanna held the tin cup in both hands, the medicine bitter on her tongue, her eyes brighter now but still ringed with exhaustion. Thomas Bell crawled to the narrow crack between the boards and peered out. "They are coupling the line," he whispered. "Morning freight is leaving early." Caleb looked at the copied wire inside the boy's coat, then at the silver coin in Ayanna's hand. Early means Vale changed the schedule. Ayanna's fingers closed tighter. "He wants us away from Blackwater before anyone asks why." The train groaned. Outside, the platform lanterns drifted past the crack as railroad hands moved through blowing snow. Nobody checked the stock car. Not yet. Caleb knelt near the sliding door and listened. He had spent enough years around rail yards to know the language of wheels and brake lines. This train was not being prepared for a normal run. Too quick. Too quiet. Too few voices. Vale wanted the car gone into empty country, where paper could be lost, stories could be rewritten, and witnesses could become rumors by sunrise. Thomas swallowed hard. Fort Mercy is 30 miles south. If the train reaches the junction, Marshal Vale can put us anywhere. The boy tried to say more, but his words tangled. Ayanna shifted closer to him, wrapped in Caleb's coat and the saddle blanket, looking less like a hunted woman now and more like someone remembering she had survived worse nights than this one. "Thomas," she said gently, "your voice does not have to run faster than your courage." The boy blinked at her. Nobody had ever spoken to him that way. Not the clerk, not the railroad men, not even the passengers who handed him coins when their wires reached home on time. He took one breath, then another. "There is a switching lever," he said, "about 100 yards past the water tower. If it is thrown before the engine clears the yard, this car goes onto the side track instead of the southbound line." Caleb looked through the crack. Between the stock car and the water tower stretched open snow lit pale by lanterns, with Vale standing near the depot steps, speaking to the conductor as if ordering coffee. "Can you throw it?" Caleb asked. Thomas went pale. "Me? You know the yard. I know wires. I know keys. I do not know how to be brave in front of men." Ayanna reached into her shawl and pulled out the silver coin. For one moment, she held it flat on her palm, letting the moonlight catch its drilled center. "This is not brave either," she said. "It is only silver until a hand refuses to let it go." She offered it to Thomas, not to keep, only to feel its weight. The boy touched it with 2 fingers. Something changed in his face. Not enough to make him fearless, just enough to make fear stop being master. The train jolted forward. Slow at first. A crawl. Wheels clanking over frozen rail. Caleb slid the door open 4 inches, and wind slapped snow into the car. "When we pass the coal shed, jump low and roll into the drift. I will be behind you." Thomas shook his head, terrified. Ayanna pushed herself upright before Caleb could protest. "No," she said. "I go." Caleb turned. "You can barely stand. The lever saves my people. The coin proves why. I will not sit in a dark car while a child carries both." For a heartbeat, the 2 of them faced each other in the blue-gray light. Old guilt in Caleb. Old distrust in Ayanna. Between them, something new, thin as a match flame and just as stubborn. Caleb nodded once. "Then we all go." The car rolled past the coal shed. Snow piled high below. Thomas slipped out first, disappearing into white powder with a soft cry quickly swallowed by wind. Ayanna followed, landing hard but rising on one knee. Caleb jumped last. The freight dragged onward without them, its dark body sliding into the storm. They ran low through the snow, three shadows against a sleeping rail yard. Behind them, Vale's voice cut through the cold. "Stop that switch." Thomas reached the lever first. His small hands wrapped around iron rimed with frost. He pulled. Nothing moved. Caleb and Ayanna reached him together. Three hands found the lever. White, brown, and small. This time, the iron gave. The switch lever slammed into place with a sound that seemed too small for what it changed. Far ahead, the freight engine shrieked steam into the night as the first cars rolled past the split rail and followed the main line south. But the stock car they had escaped shuddered onto the side track, drifting away from the train like a secret refusing to be carried any farther. Caleb stood with one hand still on the iron lever, breath smoking in the air, while Thomas stared after the car with wide eyes. "It worked," the boy whispered, as if afraid the words might undo it. Ayanna did not look at the train. She looked toward the depot. Lanterns were moving now. Men were spilling onto the platform. Marshal Gideon Vale stood among them, no longer smiling, his black coat snapping in the wind. He saw the three figures by the switch, saw the changed track, saw his quiet plan break in front of witnesses. That was when the whole station began to wake. Doors opened. Faces appeared in windows. The woman in the gray bonnet stepped onto the platform with her boy clutched close. The drummers came out half-dressed in their traveling coats. Even Harlan, the ticket clerk, stood in the doorway, pale beneath his whiskers, holding his ledger like it might protect him from truth. Vale lifted his voice over the storm. "That woman is a fugitive. Anyone standing with her stands against lawful authority." The words moved through the crowd, familiar and heavy. Caleb felt how easily people leaned toward them. Law was a warm blanket when thinking felt cold. Ayanna swayed beside him, but she did not step behind him. Caleb noticed that. She had been dragged by winter, hunted by lies, weakened by fever, yet she chose the open snow over another man's shadow. "Tell them," Caleb said softly. Ayanna looked at him. "They will not hear me." "Then make them see you standing." For a moment, her eyes searched his face, measuring whether this was another white man asking an Apache woman to perform pain for a crowd. But Caleb did not gesture. He did not command. He only stood beside her, empty belt at his hip, coat gone from his shoulders, hands open to the weather. She turned to the people of Blackwater Station. "My name is Ayanna Red Willow," she said. Her voice was not loud, but the wind carried it clean. "I was a translator for men who called my people obstacles. I carried their words until I learned what those words were hiding." Vale stepped down from the platform. "Enough." Thomas flinched, then reached inside his coat and pulled out the yellow copy of the wire. His fingers shook so badly the paper rattled. "I have it," he called. The first word caught in his throat, but he forced the rest through. "I have what he sent." People turned toward him, and the attention nearly folded him in half. Caleb wanted to shield the boy from it. Ayanna spoke first. A broken voice can still carry truth. Thomas straightened a little. "Not much. Enough." He read the wire in pieces, stumbling, stopping, starting again, but every sentence landed. It said Ayanna was not to reach Fort Mercy with testimony. It said the survey dispute must be closed before federal review. It said the witness should be transferred where no local court could interfere. No one moved when Thomas finished. Even the wind seemed to wait. Vale's face had gone flat. That boy misunderstood railroad language. Caleb stepped forward then, not in anger, not in threat, just close enough for the lantern light to show his empty holster. "Then explain why you wanted the coin." Ayanna opened her hand. The silver coin rested in her palm, small as a prayer. With careful fingers, she turned its rim and freed the hidden strip of paper inside. Caleb took nothing from her. Thomas held up his copy. Ayanna held up the map coordinates. 2 small papers. 1 silver coin. A whole town watching. From the ridge beyond the water tower, dark shapes appeared against the snow, mounted riders sitting still beneath the fading moon. Apache men, not charging, not shouting, only witnessing. The crowd saw them, and fear passed through Blackwater like a match flame through dry grass. Ayanna raised her hand, and the riders remained still. That silence did more than any weapon could have done. It showed restraint where the town had expected fury. It showed dignity where the law had offered lies. Caleb looked at Vale and said, "This is the part where truth stands on its own." Then, from the platform steps, Harlan the ticket clerk opened his ledger with trembling hands and whispered that he had recorded every private shipment Marshal Vale had sent through Blackwater for the railroad company. Harlan's whisper carried farther than he meant it to. Men heard guilt differently when it came from a book instead of a mouth. The ticket clerk stepped down from the platform, ledger open in both hands, his fingers pressed flat against the pages as though the wind might steal his courage if it could. "Private shipments," he said, voice thin but clear. "Sealed crates. Survey papers. Company payments. All signed under Marshal Vale's authority." Vale turned toward him slowly. "Close that book, Harlan." The clerk almost did. Habit moved his hands before conscience stopped them. Then he looked at Ayanna, still standing in the snow with fever in her face and the silver coin in her palm, and shame made an older man of him in a single breath. "No," Harlan said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Thomas Bell stood beside him with the copied wire. Ayanna held the hidden coordinates. Caleb reached into the snow and picked up the holster he had traded away, but he did not put it back on. He laid it on an overturned baggage crate near the platform steps. Then Thomas placed the copied wire beside it. Harlan placed the ledger beside that. Ayanna set the silver coin last, its hollow center open, the tiny strip of paper resting across it like a sliver of bone-white truth. 3 records and 1 gun left unused. That was the whole trial, if Blackwater had the spine to call it one. Vale looked at the crowd, searching for the old fear he had always counted on. Some faces still held it. Fear does not vanish because truth arrives. It only has to decide which master it will serve. The woman in the gray bonnet stepped forward first. She did not speak to Ayanna. She did not apologize. Not yet. She only pulled her son behind her and moved away from Vale's side of the platform. Then one drummer did the same. Then the other. Space opened around the marshal, quiet as a graveyard gate. On the ridge, the Apache riders remained still under the paling sky. Their horses steamed in the cold. No one advanced. No one threatened. Their silence was a mirror held up to the town, and many people did not like what they saw reflected there. Vale's smile returned, but now it looked tired, a painted sign after rain. "You think scraps of paper change ownership?" he asked. "Land is claimed by charters, deeds, rail grants, and men willing to enforce them." Ayanna stepped closer to the crate. Caleb moved with her, not ahead, not behind. Beside, she rested one hand on the coin. "Land remembers before paper does." The words settled over the crowd like snow on dark water. Caleb saw Vale's guards exchange a glance. They were railroad men, not martyrs. One took off his brass-button cap. The other lowered his eyes. Vale understood then that he was standing alone in the open, and the law he wore had grown too small to cover what he had done. From the far end of the platform, the conductor cleared his throat. "Federal Review Board comes through Fort Mercy in 2 days," he said. "If these records are real, they ought to be on that train." Thomas lifted his chin. "I can send a wire now." Nobody laughed at the way he spoke. Nobody looked away. Harlan handed him the station key. Caleb watched the boy run toward the telegraph room, small boots slipping on icy boards, and felt something loosen inside him that had been tied for years. Ayanna swayed. This time, when Caleb offered his arm, she took it. Not because she had to, because she chose to. Vale saw that too, and it seemed to trouble him more than the ledger. A white cowboy and an Apache woman standing in public without shame was a kind of rebellion no badge knew how to arrest. Caleb looked at him across the crate. Truth does not need a trigger. The sun broke thin over Blackwater Station then, touching the rails, the coin, the unused gun, and the faces of people who had spent the night learning how cold silence could be. Behind the telegraph wall, the key began to click, carrying Thomas Bell's broken but steady message down the line toward Fort Mercy. By noon, the storm had passed, but Blackwater Station did not return to what it had been. Some places change with fire, some with flood, and some with a single message clicking down a telegraph wire while a whole town stands ashamed in the snow. The federal men arrived 2 days later from Fort Mercy, riding the morning train with leather satchels, tired eyes, and the kind of silence that made liars sweat. They took Harlan's ledger. They took Thomas Bell's copied wire. They took the strip of paper hidden inside Ayanna's silver coin and compared it against the company's survey filed in court. By sundown, Marshal Gideon Vale no longer wore a badge. The railroad men who once spoke loudest began speaking through lawyers. The line that had been drawn across Apache burial ground was erased from the official map, not because mercy had suddenly become profitable, but because truth had finally arrived with witnesses enough to survive the journey. Ayanna spent 3 days in the station office recovering beside the stove, wrapped in Caleb's coat, drinking bitter medicine from a tin cup, while Apache riders waited on the ridge and did not trouble the town. That patience taught Blackwater more than anger could have. Caleb slept in a chair by the door, hat over his eyes, empty holster still hanging from the wall where he had left it. He never asked for thanks. Ayanna never offered easy forgiveness. What grew between them did not come soft, and it did not come quick. It came in the spaces between hard truths. In the way Caleb let her speak first when federal men asked questions. In the way Ayanna handed him coffee before dawn without meeting his eyes. In the way Thomas, no longer mocked for his stammer, was made assistant telegraph clerk before the week ended. Months passed. Snow gave way to mud, then grass, then a spring so green it seemed the prairie had been holding its breath all winter. The old depot sign came down in May. In its place, workers raised a new board painted deep red with white letters, Red Willow Junction. The name was written into the treaty record, not as decoration, but as a reminder that the rail would bend where the dead rested and where the living still had the right to pray. People later claimed Caleb and Ayanna married under a cottonwood tree with Apache elders on one side and railroad men on the other. Others said there was no ceremony at all, only 2 horses, one small cabin half a mile from the station, and smoke rising from its chimney at supper time. Caleb never corrected either story. Ayanna only smiled when travelers asked, touching the silver coin she now wore on a leather cord at her throat. The coin had no money left in it. Its secret was gone. That made it lighter. That made it holy. Years later, when Thomas Bell became station master, he kept a framed copy of the Fort Mercy wire above his desk. Children would ask why a broken sentence mattered so much. Thomas would point through the window to the tracks curving wide around the sacred hills and say, "Because someone finally sent the truth before fear could stop it." As for Caleb, he grew older beside Ayanna, quieter than before, but not empty. On winter evenings, when the wind scraped along the rails and the stove glowed low, he would sometimes look toward the bench where he first found her and remember how close he had come to walking past. Out here, history is not always made by generals, governors, or guns. Sometimes it begins with one freezing woman, one silver coin, and one man who decides that silence has cost enough.